Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We'll give it a couple minutes while everyone joins the call. We wanted to take some time today to introduce one of our new partners at Brault. On the line with me today is Jeff Gruber of Practice Wax, a firm dedicated to helping independent emergency physician groups develop a strategy for growth. Many of you have expressed interest in this type of resource, and we know there's a lot of interest in the industry right now with independent emergency physician groups wanting to expand their footprint and become more strategic with their growth. So as a value add to our clients, we want to introduce Jeff Gruber and his company Practice Wax as your go-to resource for developing a sustainable growth strategy. And with that, I will hand this over to Jeff.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brault. Appreciate your time and support. A little bit about my background. Thanks for spending time with us today. I have been working with emergency physician groups since 1983. The first 20 years through 2004 were with some of the staffing organizations at the time, National Emergency Services, Fisher-Mangold, Team Health. In 2004, I made a change in direction in my career and really focused on supporting independent groups. Got some sales training and recently founded a company called Practice Wax. And Practice Wax exists to help groups grow into new locations and retain their current staffing contracts, understanding it's a difficult business and getting more and more difficult every day. Some of the sales techniques that we'll be talking about here can really be found in two places. Miller-Hyman sales training has been around for decades. It really is a great fact-based training tool. And the others is a concept called whale hunting by a gentleman named Tom Searcy. I've seen Tom work with a few emergency physician groups around the country, jumpstarting their growth. And I noticed there's just a lot of similarities in his description of whale hunting and what we see in adding new locations in emergency medicine. Finally here, I don't know what your perception of sales is, but I believe in fact-based selling and that sales is an art, a science, and a business. It's an art in that if we repeat things over and receive training, we can do better in them. We can measure specific aspects of our performance. And, at the end of the day, it's a business. You're all acutely aware of the tight margins. So when we look at growth, we're assuming positive growth because, no margins, no mission. So there's two schools of thought, in contract ownership. I would say one is more of a farming attitude. You take care of what you have, you nurture it. But you're really not out there beating the bushes looking for new opportunities. It's not right for everybody. You need a well-managed group, you need a stable group, well-organized one that can make decisions. But today we're going to talk about, the groups that may be predisposed to doing some hunting. Why hunt in the first place? And then how do we hunt? The comparisons to whale hunting and growth within emergency medicine, follow me here because it's a bit of a stretch, but we're not talking about whale hunting with your nuclear powered harpoons and speedboats. We're talking more into hunting, where the prey may be larger than the boat you're on, where everyone has a very special purpose in a boat, not only in the boat, but back on the shore, because this isn't, fly fishing for trout. This is something that could either bring great wealth to your village or kill you while you're out there hunting for it. And it could do the same to your business. You'll see throughout this presentation, this is an area where I think physician leadership needs to roll their sleeves up. Physicians selling this are much better than a non-clinical person. And then you're going to have the pride of ownership that you can share. So let's get in the whale hunting mode. You're part of an independent, small tribe of highly skilled professionals. Over the last 5 or 10 years, things have gotten tougher. The hunting conditions have deteriorated. Survival's more of a struggle. You're trying to get by with less each and every year. And as you know, with a single practice, improvements are possible, but they're limited. Your volume's not going to double from year to year. It may go up a percentage point or two. So you're limited by external factors. And then one day somebody says, every year we watch the whales just swim by. If we could catch just one and bring it to shore, we could thrive. People could be healthier, happier. There'd be new opportunities for younger members of our tribe. And then all it takes is somebody to say, "Hold my ulu, I have a plan. Let's go whale hunting."
Jeff, in your experience, though, what are some of the misconceptions or reasons that groups choose not to grow?
That's a great question, Dr. Brault. The one is we've had this contract forever. We're super secure. We're not going anywhere. And we've all seen groups that are as secure as kind of the next CEO. So it doesn't pay to be looking for a backup plan, even though you've been at a place for 30 or 40 years. Changes do happen. The other area where I see people getting sort of disillusioned is the financial implications. What does this mean if I have to take out another loan? We're beyond that. And what we see in the market is it's still an attractive business loan to make, and that new groups are getting loans under reasonable terms. So that financial failure, particularly if you go through the process correctly, should be put aside. And I think the other thing, Dr. Brault, is you're not committing to anything when you decide to explore the market and have some initial conversations. How far would we drive? Is overnight travel in or out? What are the hospitals in our area? Where have our clinicians worked that might have relationships? All those things, I think, are the things that every group may want to do just to see what their options are, should they find themselves in a situation where they need to evaluate their options.
And then the other side of the coin, what are some benefits, right, to committing to growth?
I think there are many. First of all, you're going to empower your providers and give them more opportunities. In a typical shop, there's only so many leadership opportunities. You're recruiting people out of residency. What does their career path look like in a single hospital group? They may be looking at a 20-year wait to get up into the leadership. The other is you're playing defense. You're going out, you're taking the market. You're no longer beholden on maybe some of the national staffing firms that are kind of going through some other issues that we'll touch on later. And then just the economic upside for the providers. I think particularly under the No Surprises Act, we don't have the third parties, billing, going so far and billing insurance companies, 1,000, 1,500% of Medicare in order to pay competitive rates and make the margins. With that gone away, what we've seen is they're coming back to their single biggest expense, which is clinical staffing. And we're hearing from people that just are being put in situations that they don't think they should practice in. So whale hunting in business, typically refers to a single sale that's going to significantly increase your corporate size, double, time and a half. And really, if you're a single hospital group, most opportunities are going to come close to doing that. They're usually competitive because there's tremendous upside. If you look at a mid-sized suburban hospital with 50,000 visits and collections at, say, $150, that's a $7.5 million opportunity. That's a business that's out there. If you look at a system, they may have 500,000 visits, so that's 7.5 million, maybe 75 million. So corporations have found that these are extremely attractive investments because of the predictable cash flow year after year after year. The same thing that limits growth is also secure. You don't see emergency departments go from 50,000 visits to 30,000 visits traditionally. When you're a single hospital group, you don't have all the resources in the world. You're in the Intuit boat. You're not on the the big ocean liner. And everybody needs to have a role. And that doesn't mean that everybody needs to be the point person dealing with the CEO or the chief medical officer. But just you need to know your function. Some of that function is out on sales calls. Other of it is getting ready and working with Dr. Brault and her team. So all your physicians have provider numbers, perhaps in a new state, perhaps in a new area, new payers. So there's plenty of tasks to go around, but it doesn't work well unless kind of everyone's on board. We talked a little bit about the out-of-network strategy. Before we were seeing opportunities that physicians would come in and ask for a subsidy, and there were deals being done subsidy-free because of the ability to shift the financial obligations to commercial third-party payers. With that gone, it's a little bit more of an even playing field right now. The companies that are left standing, as you know, we lost a few: National Emergency Services, American Physician Partners, all went belly up within the last 2 years. Those left standing have really big debt, and they are into their relationships a lot longer than many of their private equity bankers would like to hold. And interest rates are higher now than when they got into these deals 5 or 6 years ago. So the amount of debt that they're carrying for a full-time doc is huge. And then there's just, if you Google Wall Street Journal physician equity, or excuse me, private equity and physician practices, you're going to see a lot of articles in the last couple of years. The media is starting to focus on some of the bad behavior. A lot of billing companies had problems with, the Change debacle last year. I'm sure it's impacted many of your practices. But the media is starting to understand now that maybe owning everything vertically from the facility to the insurance product to the clinician isn't in our best interest. So that's why I think the tables have changed, and there's some opportunities that didn't exist previously. So farmers and hunters, we talked a little bit about the reasons for being a hunter, but this just highlights some of them. We understand the fact that you need to take care of your principal practice location first and foremost. You need to have a great reference, and it's also feeding you currently. But we talked about it's risky. You don't own the bricks and mortar, and the leadership opportunities, and the fact that the national staffing companies are calling your CEO, I would say at a minimum quarterly, many more monthly. Hunters, it doesn't mean you're going to add something this year, but you're starting to act like a hunter. You're scouting. You're asking people, well, how was it working in this location with company X or company Y? When you hear about a market change, if you have another NES that folds up on no notice, you want to make sure that the local hospitals know that you are an option. Everybody else is calling them saying, hey, this company's going under. Unless you've reached out, there's no reason that they're going to call you and assume that you can take over their emergency department. You'll find that market knowledge is power. The more you know about what's going on around you at competing facilities, the more power you're going to have at your location. You're going to know whether your services are overvalued, undervalued, and just the knowledge is power. And the other thing I would say is it's really a talent magnet. As you're trying to recruit, people want to be part of growing, vital, exciting organizations. No matter what sort of their allied interest is, whether it's EMS, education, an academic center, they're going to have more opportunities if you're a growing organization. It's a lot of fun to be part of that. Why hunt? I firmly believe, and if you don't join me here, you probably shouldn't hunt, that independent groups outperform private equity-owned practices. Your focus day to day is not on what the interest rate is, what's going on across town. Owners act different than renters. When it comes to the end of the day, you don't wash your rental car before you return it to Hertz. We talked about some of the vulnerabilities right now. We've had the implosions. Those go fast. That's not the time to be developing a relationship. That's the time to call the CEO and say, based on the conversation we had last month, let's get together. The American Academy of Emergency Medicine continues to champion for independent groups. Pretty much pushed Envision out of California a couple of years ago. I'm seeing more transparency in the clinical staffing than I've ever seen before. What Dr. Leon Edelman has put together with Ivy clinicians and a database of every facility in the United States that tells you who's there, their corporate structure, recruiting needs, is really a great place to get started. And then the huge debt. When Apollo or KKR or Blackstone um, try to unload some of these investments they make, there's not a big market for it now, because when they purchased them, it was before the Accountable Care Act, and the sky was the limit for reimbursement, and it's a different world right now. I think the last reason, though, is most CEOs, given the option, want to work with you. If they know you have the resources, you can walk them through how you're going to get from point A to point B. They understand that owners act different than renters, and unless there is some, corporate prohibitions, like HCA took everything in-house, CHS typically does it in-house. I think you're going to find there's a lot more people that want to talk to you than you might otherwise imagine. But let's go whale hunting. What does that involve?
And Jeff, if I could just kind of make a
Absolutely.
few comments. Yeah. Certainly what and I think my experience in the market, sort of mirrors yours. Just on the sort of the RCM side, right? We are seeing some improvement, right, in the dollars in the financing compared to the roller coaster we've been on, right, in terms of the NSA and the sort of the improvements in the IDR process, and compared to a few years ago and the sort of just horrible, downturn in the collection in the non-contracted payments. So that it's a better financial picture than it has been in the last few years. And also when I look at my clients in the various health systems, even if they aren't, sort of hungry for growth, I think showing up in the health system as though they are prepared to be a partner in that health system should there suddenly be a need to fill, right? A contract medical group suddenly pulls out or demands a stipend that's not affordable. You want to appear as though you are ready as a partner at the table, right? So you're ready for the leadership in that health system. They know who you are, because if they don't know who you are likely, your contract is sort of on the table, like that old, be at the table or be on the table, right? So especially in these larger health systems, you want to be visible, you want to be seen as someone who desires growth, as strategic, as a partner. Otherwise, your contract very much can be, threatened. I don't know what your experience is with that as well.
Absolutely. And I always try to put myself in the health system seat. And if I'm dealing, and I have, say, 15 hospitals in a market, and, one of the big staffing companies has 13 of them, and there's 2 independent groups. It's very hard for me to get uniformity. I have to deal with extra people, extra organizations. I believe in independent groups, but if they're not well organized and it takes, a month for them to get back to me on everything, it's very frustrating. And your contract is absolutely at risk, because eventually you're going to get somebody that says, why do we have 2 outliers? Why don't we just contract? So those 2 outliers, if they're not together, maybe need to work together at least, and be giving that message to administration that, hey, we're outperforming these guys. Hey, we want to grow. Hey, let's talk about new opportunities. I know you're building some freestanding EDs. Would love to, have an opportunity for some different clinical venues for our clinicians. But as you said, if they don't know you want to do that, it's just easier to go with the people that call me every month and ask if there's any needs.
Yeah. So much about sales is who's called you in the last, most recently. The last 3 names you wrote down are the ones you're going to call when when you have that need and you need to fulfill it, unfortunately.
You're absolutely right. And I don't know what your experience has been, but this is a big decision for hospitals to make. So most phone calls you get, are going to be, no, not interested now, not interested now. You're still serving a purpose, though, by letting them know you have an interest in long term. So when the precipitous event happens, when the straw that breaks the camel's back happens, whether it's a bad physician or a company with financial problems, You want to be one of the last people that they think, oh, we'll call these guys. They're local. They're doing a good job here. So absolutely, you got it. The first step is letting people know what you want to do and why. All right. So some practical advice for how to get started. You got to know the whale. So what are your potential targets? Um, it could be system related. You may be, a small hospital within a system, and there may be growth opportunities there. Maybe geographic. Hey, we're in a major metropolitan area. There's 30 hospitals around here. There's got to be one that would be interested in our model. And then you want to start investigating your connections. Not everybody came out of residency and started working with your practice. Have anybody worked there? Do you know, get on LinkedIn. Do you know any of the CEOs? Are there any connections there you can make? Who's always recruiting? Look on the Ivy clinicians. Who's always recruiting for full-time providers or a medical director? Pick up the phone. That maybe shouldn't happen in your market. And then you need to rule out. I mean, there are some health systems there that you may just not want to work with. Like I said, HCA does it internally, CHS tends. There may be some for quality reasons that you want to rule out, bad local reputation, don't take care of the physicians. So get that list. And what you're going to find out as you go through this is you're going to end up with a list that started with 30, but there's like 4 that you really, you want to go after, you have an opportunity to go after. So get rid of the static and focus on what you have a chance at. The next is to sort of understand within your group who's doing what. There's plenty of roles to go around, but the time to sell your group on growth is not during a sales opportunity. You need to make sure everybody's on board, rowing in the same direction. The other thing, you'll hear me mention guides a lot. In my career, I can count the number of key sales that I've won without a guide on one hand. Usually when I've got a good sale, it's because somebody on the buyer side was selling for me when I wasn't in the room. They understood that this group could deliver what you could deliver. And when I'm gone, they're saying, no, we got to go with these guys. And they're answering objections. Without that, you're making it a long shot. So you need to develop those relationships long-term. And then, when you're engaging a target, that's just the beginning of the process. You want to find out there's some interest. And then, as I say, sit in their seat. What about you scares them? Talk about the elephant in the room. They may be worried you can't get funding. Talk about a line of credit that you would have. They may be worried because they've had such bad experience with turnover that you're going to be the same. You may want to tell them that, no, we don't have that problem. Your staffing model is the self-fulfilling prophecy. Find out what they're afraid of because you need to address it. Don't be afraid. I always say you're not asking for their mom's meatloaf recipe. It's business. Push a little bit. So then the hunting. This is, you find somebody that's interested. How do we get a handle on this? When I say ride the whale, it means there's going to be buyers when you look at a hospital. There's going to be, you're going to meet some people in nursing, you're going to meet the chief of medical staff, you might meet somebody in IT. All of them have different interests in your success or failure at the hospital because what it's going to do to their job. You need to find out what they think a win is. And you also need to identify at the end of the day, there's going to be one signature on your contract. I refer to that as the economic buyer. You need access to the economic buyer, and they need to understand your value proposition because you can waste a lot of time talking to people. Everyone loves to talk about a deal, right? But some of them are just, they're just talking. They're sharing information not only with you, with everybody. You want to get to the situation where you're getting financial information from a hospital that you can then feed back to them. Mr. CFO, you said you're supporting this group $1.5 million a year. You could use more admissions. You're left without being seen as double what it is. We'll do the math and show that CFO what you're going to bring to them. And you say based on the data you provided, and then you walk it through. You want to make sure you have that support before you put anything in a proposal, because you can tweak it. If you check it first, you can tweak it and you can refine it so that you get the CFO nodding in the room. Sew the mouth shut. I guess in whale hunting, if you don't do this, once you kill the whale, it sinks to the bottom of the ocean, which is not good. What I look at it as is this needs to be a confidential process. When you're trying to secure businesses, $5 million, $10 million, $20 million in value, everybody wants to talk to you about it, and everybody's going to, have their own conversations after, and you're going to introduce new competitors. You need to really treat this as confidential information, and not talk. It just needs to be limited. So, a lot of the work starts. It certainly starts for Dr. Brault's team once the whale's secured. So you've got the whale. You're bringing it into the beach. Hopefully those folks knew you were coming, so that the providers are enrolled and the campfires are going to boil the oil and whatever else you do with a giant whale. But this is also the time, in my experience, that the hospital feels most vulnerable. It's from that day where they make the announcement that they're going to your group and they're providing notice to the incumbent group. Usually that's going to be a period of 60 to 120 days. And they feel they've lost control. The existing group is going to get people quitting and walking off the job they're afraid of. And what if you back out? So during the sales process, you want to be as clear as possible, in my opinion, how you're going to handle that transition period. A best practice that I saw was the day that the hospital announced the change to the existing group, 4 members of the new group was there. They met with ED leadership, they met with board members, they met with key medical staff members, because the incumbent group is going to go out and spread a lot of rumors about you. They're going to be in their death throes trying to keep the contract. You want to have people that are telling the story and what you're going to bring to the party. Honored. You want to deliver some quick wins. If the hospital was complaining about the staffing ratio, make a quick change. You need to give those people that stuck their neck out for you some quick wins so that they can go to their board and their bosses and appear successful. And the other thing is celebrate. Startups are hard. Even the easy ones are hard. We're inherit, maybe 80% of the people. They're buying you for your culture, not just warm bodies. And transforming a culture is difficult. So you want to make sure that everyone's on board, that you seed your new location with, some of your superstars, for those first shifts. And then set expectations in the training of what it means to be a part of your group. It's just huge in starting each of these off right, because if you do, it's the old they tell 2 people and they tell 2 people. And I've seen groups just, spread throughout states by just sticking to their knitting, picking out good targets, delivering good messages, and then executing on, of course, what they promised. So, Dr. Brault, that was a lot of information that we went through today. Any other questions that you think I should address for the folks watching?
Yeah, maybe just a few comments. Because emergency physicians, we tend to think in very, very short time frames. Like if I'm thinking about what happens tomorrow, and that's just not how it works. And so, really, just maybe a little bit, a question, a comment, maybe just spend a little bit more time talking about kind of, what kind of time are we talking about, right? If I'm going to go to my group and say, hey, we're kind of vulnerable, we're a 1-site, 2-site, I'd like us to think about growth. What are we really talking about?
I would not judge my efforts before 2 or 3 years down the road, because it just takes time. There's going to be that internal time to get it, to walk members that maybe are a little skeptical through and show them what their role could be. Some folks, I can't travel. My spouse has this job. Well, great. We're going to need people to pick up extra shifts here. They just may not understand everything. So getting everyone on board is critical. What's your unique value proposition? Why are you different than staffing company A, B, or C? That takes some time to get from here, onto paper, especially when it involves getting it from a group of very bright people, down to a sentence or two, that they could stand behind. What's their organization? Do they have, not only the billing, but do they have the practice management infrastructure, compensation, accounting, HR that they need to take this on and give the hospital confidence that they can pull it off? All of those need to be done on sort of parallel tracks, while they're reaching out and sticking their toe in the water. Very occasionally, you're going to get that third person you talk to says, wow, I'm going out to bid in 2 weeks. That's the exception rather than the rule. It's a multi-year process. Folks that want to do business with you too fast, you should be a little bit leery of, because if they've changed every 2 years for the last decade, why are you different? What are they really choosing for? Are they pressuring you to do things that you don't want to do down in the emergency department? Questionable admissions, or what is it? Do your homework as much as they're reference checking on you, and give yourself adequate time and resources to evaluate the process.
Yeah, thank you. And I would add, it's also sort of building out your relationships, building and the guides, right, all across your health system, building out brand awareness of your group. You are the, high benefit, low risk choice for the health system, right? All those things, those are multi-year investments, right? Soccer field conversations, med staff, med exec meetings, all those things where you just start to show up over time, right? So it's not a commitment to be a group that grows tomorrow. It's a commitment to invest and sort of plant the seeds over time to be ready to grow.
100%. There's actions that they could take today and tomorrow, but some of those actions may not bear fruit for a couple of years, 3 years, 4 years. But I would absolutely be getting a list together and maintaining a list, because, as you mentioned, those things are going to take time, regardless of when you start them. And if you wait until you hear about an opportunity, it's too late. It's just, these things move fast, because CEOs, they need to, their 24/7 coverage is up in the air, and they're extremely demanding timelines on some of these. So all the front end work, could take a year, frankly, just to have these discussions internally before you go out and start whale hunting. And just, all Brault clients, I would love to have any introductory brainstorming sessions with them, do some homework for them on, what hospitals are in their area that they may, start with a list, anything to jumpstart it. Talking to, partners that may not see the benefits in growth, available for all that. Over 40 years, you observe, how people have done things right, wrong, and questionable. So I'd love to share that with folks. And like I said, working with groups to increase their footprint is just a special place in my heart. I've enjoyed doing it for, the duration of my career.
Yeah, I think that's a great conclusion to our webinar, Jeff. I would encourage all of our clients to meet with you, even if they don't think that they're interested in growth. Have the conversation, kind of think about what it might mean. Geography is geography, so the whole world's not likely on the plate for them, right? Their geography, we can map it out. We have a database, right? And just have the conversation and see what it might entail, and just go from there. So.
And I'll warn you, it's infectious. When you start growing and get some good quality wins, it's just fun. It's just a good time to be part of the organization, with new opportunities, and you meet some great people. Just really good personal experiences with it.
Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar. And hopefully you will reach out and give Jeff a call. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Dr. Brault.